Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Mobile hunters, our buddies over at Tethered are always innovating to keep us more mobile and in the game when it counts. From the Tethered One Sticks, the Fast Pack, to the Ultra Lock saddle, Tethered is always designing to increase comfort and utility while reducing bulk, weight, and fiddle factor of mobile hunting gear. And now, they've outdone themselves yet again by creating the carbon fiber forged Predator CFX platform, the latest fully featured mobile saddle platform that raises the bar for what's possible in mobile hunting gear. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got on my brother from another mother, Mr. Tony Peterson. What's going on, man?
I'm just getting the best introduction I've ever had on a lot of podcasts. So thanks for that, man.
Nice. Yeah, Tony Peterson. Dude, I shaved a mustache in just for you. I didn't want you to feel like you were too far removed or separated from Mark during this session. So
got to flatten the brim of that hat out a little bit. Got to tell me about some butterflies and some prairie grasses, and we'll be there, man.
Right. There you go. I don't know if I can do all that. I could maybe find a flat brim around here somewhere. I don't know I don't own a flat brim. I'd have to literally like iron this thing and straighten it out. Or how's this look? Is that good?
It's not bad. I think after I saw you just here now with your mustache, I think that you should have to be into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to have a mustache. I think it just works for you. Because I think it's different when you see somebody like Mark and you're like, that guy, he's not rolling with anybody on the mats, right? He shouldn't have a mustache. But I see you and I'm like, that guy can handle having a mustache.
Right, yeah. It's funny because the mustache is going around the gym right now. Like there's a bunch of dudes like all of a sudden like within like the past like 2 or 3 weeks like guys have just been randomly showing up with mustaches, which is kind of funny. And like so I walked in the other day. So my buddy Dave first had his he had a big old like Grizzly Adams beard, and it was terrible rolling with him because like anytime you grabbed like a guillotine or anything around his neck, you felt bad because you grabbed like a handful of beard at the same time. You know what I mean? And so he comes in the one day like shaved like just like walrus stash, like straight across, right? And then this other guy, Dave, he came in with like a stash. He looks like he's from like the Hitler Youth, though. Like he's got his hair slicked back. He's like, just like the way his haircut is, like his mustache isn't like that, but he's got like this haircut and he just looks very German, So whenever you're rolling with him, like I always say, like, hey man, I'm the Allied Forces, It's like kind of like the joke in the gym.
Got that Hitler hairdo going. Which Radiohead song is that from? There's a Radiohead song.
They have a song called Hitler Hairdo.
High and Dry, maybe?
High and Dry? I don't know. Man, Radiohead was like a probably Pablo Honey, of course. Right. And then I think I was cool up to like OK Computer. That was about the time that they started losing me. Like Kid A, I think was good. OK Computer was pretty good, and then I was kind of like, all right, this is getting a little weird.
They had some good stuff. I find myself, I don't listen to Radiohead a lot of the year, but I find myself getting pretty depressed by the end of the winter. So by like March, I'll be like, man, I've been listening to a lot of Radiohead lately. Dude, it's like probably time to move on.
Dude, listening to the Radiohead in the winter, like, dude, that is just like, talk about really kind of drive home the seasonal depressive disorder. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but they have they got some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I like a lot of their stuff.
Yeah. I had a lot of good times listening to their stuff. Like, well, I'll say good times in quotes, like a lot of good times.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, listening to their stuff. Yeah, man, I was never a huge Radiohead fan. Like I dug their stuff, but it was more like some of the people I knew, like during that time, whenever that, they were putting out those initial records, were super into them, especially like all the hippies in college. Like they were not the hippies, but like the the hippies who didn't like shitty music, I guess I should say, like those people that I hung out with, like they were super into Radiohead. And so that's kind of how I got not indoctrinated into Radiohead, but like it was just always on or around. And so I was kind of like, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. Like these couple songs are kind of cool or whatever. And then I would go home and listen to Tool and then listen to some death metal, you know?
Yeah. There was a time where you couldn't escape Radiohead.
Oh man.
In fact, I read something the other day where they said, Creep, you know, they said the guitarist hated that song. Didn't want to play it, didn't want it on the record. And so that crunchy part, right, leading right into the chorus where he, you know, that guitar part, they said he put that in there to try to ruin the song. Like he was like way overplaying that part because it kind of didn't fit. You know, I mean, that was kind of like a metal, like a kind of drone rock type of song, but he threw that in there because he was like intentionally trying to ruin it. It's like so iconic now.
Yeah, that's like you think of that song, that's like what you think of. Like that's the gestalt of the song, really. Right. You know? Yeah. It's I've been going down the rabbit hole of like listening or watching podcasts with different Rick Beato, like, and I promise people that are listening, we'll tie this back into like deer hunting at some point. But Rick Beato was a record producer who some of the guys that I played with worked with. Actually, my drummer and my bass player were in a band prior to me playing with them, and they did a record with Rick Beato. This would have been in like the very early 2000s. And I really didn't know much about who he was like early on. And then, you know, he was just very kind of like a quintessential kind of like 90s producer. You know, he didn't make any of the big records like, you know, the Rage Against the Machines, the Soundgardens, the Tool records or STP or whatever. He was kind of like one part removed from that, but he kind of ran in the same circles as all these people, you know. And he has a great YouTube channel, and he's also like just a master musician. Like, I don't know if I think he went to Berkeley, like for music or whatever, but like he plays everything. He has like perfect pitch. Like you put whatever instrument in front of him and he can slay it, you know, and he just is like a theory wizard. So he does a lot of like seminars on teaching and stuff like that. But you would geek out on this because what he does is he takes like these iconic songs, and he's also from the era of, he's a little older than you and I, but his era of expertise is really the era that you and I grew up listening to. So he takes these songs from, you know, Tool or STP or Soundgarden and kind of like breaks them down like why they're great. So not only like from like a music, like this sounds really good to your ear, like this melody is great, this guitar part is great, this drum part is great, whatever, but breaks it down into like why it actually makes sense, like why it's great, like from a music standpoint. And so it's like he'll go through like the different chords that they're using and like the different variations of chords that they're using, and the singer's singing this, which is making this like natural harmony with the chords the guitar players play. And it's just like mind blowing to kind of go through it, because you start to go like, it boggles my mind the same way I think that like space boggles yours to a degree, where I'm like, I loosely understand some of this stuff, but the part that blows my mind is how the human brain, like the people who are writing this stuff, you know, they didn't write it with that intention. They wrote it and they sang it because that's what they heard. And it just so happened that it marries up like from a theory standpoint, you know what I mean? That it's like, and it's makes beautiful music, and that you just do that subconsciously, you know, and he's breaking it down very consciously, like why it makes sense from a theory standpoint and why it works and why it sounds so good. And I'm always like, it's like magic. Like whenever people are that good at like song crafting, you know what I mean? Like I was okay at it, you know, never great, you know, but whenever you watch like someone break down like people who are great at it, you know, it goes with anything, right? Like when you watch from afar, like someone who's like, you know, a great fly fisherman. Like I have a friend who's just like, I had him on not too long ago, Luke Scheimer. He's from Montana, but he lives in the Caribbean part of the year. He's just one of those guys. And I made a joke whenever we had him on the podcast where I was like, when I watch him do things in the woods, when I get a chance to hunt with him, it's like watching the movie A River Runs Through. Because you just see someone who is so quintessentially in their element, clearly born to do that thing, that you can't imagine them doing anything else. And that to me is like when you watch like great songwriters and kind of understand how they do it, you're just like, it's like a gift. Like it just, something came down and like touched them, was like, boom, you're going to be able to do this.
But you know what the difference is though? If you look at, I don't know, you take your pick, amazing musician, Tom Morello, right? guitarist for Rage Against the Machine, right? If you look at that guy, there's a version of that guy in the Whitetail Woods. Like I've been thinking about. In fact, I just wrote about this with like why we love music is partially tied to our evolutionary like bend toward patterns. Like we've had to figure out patterns in nature to survive. So everything from like, the hexagons in a honeycomb. Honey is one of the most ancestrally consistent foods out there. Everybody can eat it. It's good for you. You can eat it raw. And it's because we've been eating it forever. And you can find it on just about every continent. And so we're like really good at recognizing patterns, and music plays into that. Where like you hear that riff and then the break and you anticipate the next riff, but it changes a little bit. And that like, we like that. And so I always like, anyway, you think of somebody like Tom Morello, who is, he's written some stuff that's just wild, like just such a different style, so good. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, there's guys like that in the Whitetail Woods, and we never think about it that way. If you take like a Jason Phelps or a Corey Jacobson elk caller, we can recognize this. There's special there. Like there's just something special there that those guys are doing, because we can kind of witness that and understand why that would be so beneficial. But watching Andy May walk through the woods isn't the same thing. Even though, the way that Tom Morello writes a solo, it's not a purely academic situation. He's not like, this needs these notes in this order now. He's like, this feels right, and I'm going to go with it. And then he's working on it, and he'll bend a note here or whatever, and all of a sudden he's like, that whole thing is like divine intervention. On the hunting side, we're like, everybody's exactly equal. Everybody can walk out there and follow the same, hunting style, strategies, plans, products, whatever, and the outcome will be the same. And it doesn't take into account not only like the learned part of it, but the instinctual part of it, and just that like gift of, for whatever reason, being better in nature than the next dude.
Yeah. It's funny because like as you were talking, there was something I thought about this. This is going to sound really like unfortunate. I thought about you in the shower. Like, but it was,
that explains the mustache.
That explains the Freddie Mercury mustache, man. Like 100%. No, it was, either in the shit or in the shower is like where I do a lot of my best thinking, a lot of thinking. And while you were talking, it just kind of reminded me, and I jotted it down, was that, one thing that I noticed whenever they talk to these, going back to the Rick Beato kind of example, he'll have these musicians on sometimes and he'll talk about some of these great songs whenever he gets a chance to interview them, and he'll play parts of them and stuff like that. And even like some of these guys who are, or ladies who are just amazing musicians, when you take maybe like Led Zeppelin, for example, right? Like if you ever see an interview with those guys, like they've got some ego, right? But that is like their persona, like when they're Led Zeppelin, right? When they're writing though, like a lot of times like the ego kind of goes away, because most of those cats that are really, really good when it comes to like the writing process, like they're insecure about it, right? And that goes with a lot of people, like with hunting. Like you'll have guys who like you see their results and you're like, dude, like that guy is amazing. But when you actually get a chance to talk to him, like you realize not that they're insecure, that they have like confidence issues necessarily, but like they don't think they're the best, right? Like until the result comes in, it's like, yeah, I did a really good job, right? Like I knew what I was doing, but it's usually never happens like in advance of like the outcome. And so I started kind of thinking about ego related to hunting, right? And this idea of, removing the ego for better hunting, or removing the ego to kill bigger bucks or whatever, right? And the reason I kind of came to it was two. One was while I was in the shower, had the hot water on my arm because I got arm barred, and it was ego that not forced me, but the reason why I didn't tap, and I ended up getting out of the arm bar, but the cost was that my elbow popped and I have a competition in like 2 weeks and I have a sore elbow, right? And that was the ego. And the reason why it got caught was because I tried to complete the escape a little bit too quickly, and I wasn't technically sound, and I wasn't exactly where I needed to be in order to get out, right? And so I paid the price, right? How often in the whitetail woods do we have ego and our ego gets in the way of fulfilling our goals, whether it's a filled tag or whatever. And you said this to me, and I've been preaching it from the mountaintop, and that you told me that when you just start deer hunting, you'll be surprised how quickly tags will fill and how often you'll start to see big deer hit the ground. And that was my year this year, right? And so I give a lot of credit to you for like kind of instilling that in me, and like me kind of thinking of that like during the time. And then it dawned on me while I was in the shower the other day that ego component of it in hunting is the part when you start to strip that away and you start to kind of, remove the I'm this or I'm that, and you're just there for the ride, man, does it become super cool and fulfilling. And that's pretty much in anything. Yep. Right? Like that, I feel like that's like music, that's in relationship, that's at work, that's at, whatever. Like when you remove that part of it and you can just be present in what's happening, like you're winning all day.
Yep. But I think we like kind of universally look at like ego as a negative, and I really don't. I mean, obviously it can be, but
right.
Like when you talk about, a lot of these guys who are just killers, who are like, they don't come off as very confident. Mm-hmm. They'll just kind of as quickly just attribute it to luck before explaining, well, I went in here because of this and I was hoping this or whatever. But it's never like, I knew this and this was going to happen if I just did it. It's not like that. But I remember when I got laid off from Peterson's bow hunting, and I was like, I'm going to be a freelance writer and I'm going to focus on public land whitetails because that's what everybody seems like they want to see. I was terrified because I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And I had to lean into my ego and just be like, you got this, like this, you can make this happen. But the whole time on the inside, I was like, even, the first couple of years, I killed some good deer, and like I had a start I felt was like good. I'm like, I'm really happy with how things have gone so far, but you just sit there and you're just terrified that it's just going to end. And so I think in a lot of stuff you have, especially at sort of maybe not super beginner, but maybe intermediate stage, if you're really like, I want to level up, I want to get better. Like you look at guitars, if you're like, I'm going to go try to make a career out of this, or like even just get somewhere with it, you have to hit that stage where you're like, I'm a badass and I can do this. And maybe that'll get you working there. But if you don't get through that and realize that there are, millions of people who are more talented than you, and 8-year-olds on YouTube that are playing better stuff than you can, like you got to get to a, yeah. you can use it. It can be a good thing. I mean, it can be like super off-putting if you don't have control of it, but it can be like a powerful motivator and just a way to sort of trick yourself into just keeping going. But it's like it's like a gun with no safety, man. Like you got to be careful with it.
Right. That's a great point, man, because, you're right in the sense that you need a little bit of it to keep you kind of, and I hate saying motivated because I just don't like the word motivated. I like the word kind of disciplined, right? Like I prefer to use that, right? Because motivation, it's like, that means like something externally like has to force you or compel you to do something. I prefer to be either, disciplined. So there's enough ego there that has to be there to keep you kind of, confident enough that things can get better, right? Like, and maybe sometimes it's just blind stupidity. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's that too, right? Where it's just like, I'm too dumb to realize I'm not any good at this, And then I think once you hit a certain point, I think that's whenever you can start to like turn the ego on and off a little bit to understand when you need it to power through and like be steadfast in something. Or you need to dial it back because there's clearly like there's a hole, right? And I kind of equate it to, whether it's bow hunting or training, right? And like 2 examples would be, in training, kind of recognizing, when I should be playing games and learning versus trying to win rounds, right? Like turn the ego off. Don't need to win every round. I can quote unquote lose rounds to people who maybe I should be able to beat because I'm exploring and I'm learning, right? Versus ego, like now getting ready for a competition, right? So I'm going to go a little harder. And now like the rounds are more like I'm trying to put my game together, right? Where with hunting, it's like, you have the ego to where it's like, like I'll give you the example from this year. Like I knew I was going to kill that deer in Kansas. Like I knew it was going to happen. And which was good because I like had the ego to go, yeah, I'm arrogant enough. I think I'm just going to go kill this deer tomorrow in this spot. Right. And it worked. Then you need to dial back the ego and recognize that there was some luck involved with that. Like I was right, but like all the things had to line up for me to do it. You know what I mean? And so there's still things I need to learn and like holes in my game I need to fill.
Right. How many times have you just had so much confidence that you had a plan and then you go do it and just blank? I mean,
dude,
because it's
every time until that one.
Right. I mean, but that's sort of the thing too. Like I don't mean to keep going back to this, but I'm teaching one of my daughters how to play guitar right now. And she's pretty natural. She's pretty good. Mm-hmm. She's very for a 12-year-old. She's very disciplined in learning stuff. Like she's gonna go far. She doesn't need somebody to push her. Mm-hmm. But I'll teach her a song, and then she'll be like, "I don't want to learn a new one. It's too hard." And I'll be like, "Well, you thought 'Wish You Were Here' was going to be too hard, or you thought that little riff from System of a Down, Spiders, was going to be too hard, and you got it in like a half hour." Mm-hmm. And so there's like this thing where like sometimes when you're like, I'm going to kill this Kansas buck and it works out, you're like, that's freaking awesome. But a better way to look at it, I think, is just to be like, to have that feeling a lot. Like put in the work to have that feeling, even though and I know and everybody listening to this knows every time you walk into the woods, 99% of the time that plan's bullshit and you go, I believed in my heart of hearts I was going to see this deer or have an encounter with him or whatever, and it did not work out. But that belief is like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would really categorize it as ego. Like maybe if you were calling your shots every time and being like, I'm definitely going to do this, like you could go too far with it. But I think a lot of hunters suffer from the opposite, which is there's no way he's going to show up, so I'm not going to go do that. And that I think like, because I've dealt with this. I dealt with this year. So when I went to North Dakota and filmed a show, walked into this spot that I'd killed a buck one other time. I'd hunted there like 2 days one other time. Walked in there, set up, had a great big deer come in, had a little equipment malfunction and missed him, and it was a bad deal. 4 seconds later when I'm talking about that, another buck runs in. He busts me at like 10 yards. And so on public land in 2 hours, well, in a span of literally like a couple minutes, I had encounters with 2 really good deer and blew them both up. And my cameraman was like, where are we? Like, what's going on? Like, how is this even possible? And I was like, dude, it's just the setup. Like, you don't hardly see any deer, but when one comes down the trail there, it's a good one. And the next day we went in there to do an all-day sit, and it was super cold, and we were on this ridge, and I was like, we're not going to make all day. It was like North Dakota 40-mile-per-hour winds and a blizzard kind of thing. And so I was like, let's drop back and set up on that oak tree we found on the way in yesterday that had all this sign around it. Even though I know there isn't a good tree to set up in, I know it's not this setup, but I'm like, I don't want to give up on today, and I have enough faith in that to make it work. And he was like, you're freaking crazy. Like, why would we leave this spot that's just set up so well? And I was like, I don't know, man. I just think it's going to work out. And we go in there and we sit for the rest of the day in a terrible little natural ground blind that we threw together. And I killed that second buck that I screwed up on that evening. And he's like, he's a good deer hunter too. And he was like, I cannot believe like you had the confidence to leave there and go here. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like that's just how this stuff works sometimes. And you mostly get it wrong. But when you try, like when you believe in yourself and you go, I'm going to try that. Sure. 24 out of 25 sits you get wrong.
Right.
But
that one time that it hits, you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, I mean, I think that you need to have conviction in the decisions you make when you hit the whitetail woods. You know what I mean? Like you live with, hays in the barn, right? You live with the decisions that you're going to make now. You've got the information that you got, and it is what it is at that point. Like I look at that more like having conviction in the information that you know versus having an ego. I think you're right. Like I think a lot of guys miss opportunities more than they gain them. but I think ego too sometimes puts guys in wrong spots because that ego gives them a false sense of conviction, and they're sitting in a spot that they want something to happen that's never going to happen, but they want it to happen there.
Right.
Right. And the inverse happens, right? Which means it never happens.
Yep. Right.
Because they're not where the deer want to be. And what I kind of learned, to kind of tie a bow or like, push the ego thing kind of forward, is that there's a deer that I won't say I'm enamored with, but I shared it with you, like you've seen him, that I know he's alive. And part of me, my natural instinct was to try to really figure out everything that I could for all seasons. Cause there's a particular time of year that he's killable, and rest of the year, he's not. It's a couple weeks. And so I was really kind of chomping at the bit and scouting, looking, trying to figure out where he might be spending his time outside of that period of time that he's killable. And I just and this is like, again, when I was in the shower last night, this is what I was thinking about. It was like the arm bar made me think of ego. And then like, I started thinking about other stuff. And then I was like, maybe I'm getting more mature finally. Where, because, what I had said a couple weeks ago, whenever I really didn't find a whole lot of stuff that I was looking for to maybe figure out where he was at, during a broader time of the year, I just said to myself, just kill him when he wants to be killed. Like, don't try to force him or force the hunt into a time of year where he's not either going to be around, not visible, not killable, like whatever the case is. Like, drop your ego and just do it whenever he wants to do it, and that was kind of like the learning lesson, it was like, just do it the way he wants the party to go down, and I think too often we think we can manipulate more than we can, whether it's with mock scrapes or scents or food plots or whatever the case is. It's like, man, they're deer. Like, they're going to do deer things. And when they show you who they are, believe them, and then take advantage of that. Don't try to make them fit into your world. You fit into theirs.
Dude, I could not agree more. I've been writing about this kind of concept a lot lately, where I think most hunters want the hunt to happen where they want it to happen, but most successful hunters know, like, if you're going to go out and if you can't truly manipulate the land and you don't have a really good spot, which is most people, right? Like, if you're hunting public land or permission,
it's like 99% of people,
right?
Yeah.
You have to just go where they are killable. And it's like, what we do is we go, well, I like to sit on the edge of the beans or whatever, because I can see a long ways, and deer always come out, and we don't kill them early. And so we're like, well, they'll come out here during the rut. The rut will save me or whatever. And it's a poor way to approach it. Because if you actually work the deer a little bit and try to figure out what they're doing, maybe not even daily, but maybe weekly during the season, if you can get clued into something, there's so many opportunities there for most people, but they're not going to happen the way you want them to. Like, it's not going to be that easy hunt with that stand you hung in July a lot of times. Like, it's going to be something different. That's just how it works. And we have a hard time kind of accepting that. If you just dive into the public land thing, you inherently understand that that's just the way it's going to go. Like, you're primarily going to be mobile all the time and have to scout a ton and wait for that little window, like you're talking about, where he's just like, I'm just daylighting here in mid-October because I like working scrapes in this valley or whatever. But most people just they can't get there, and I think it's partially because we do want it to be easy. And I think it's partially because until you've done that enough and built up some confidence around it, that's a really hard way to hunt. Like, that's just, on paper, that sounds so fun. Like, being mobile all season and saddling up here and there and find a fresh sign. What it doesn't take into account is how often you get into a place where there's no good setups, where the wind and the weather is always working against you, where the other hunters are there when you didn't expect it, when you sneak in and do everything right and you blow a bunch of deer out. I mean, it's mostly failure stacked upon failure for all of us, but some people get comfortable with it because they know it's going to break right for me if I keep doing this, and that's still a better odds for me than volume hunting something that I just want to hunt.
Right. Yeah. And that hot sign setup, like chasing the hot sign, I think is certainly can be effective. Like I've done it in the past and have had, successful hunts doing it. But more often than not, they were unsuccessful. And it wasn't because I was in a bad spot to hunt. It's like I was probably a day late. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think you can really start to hunt hot sign effectively. At least, I'm curious what your thoughts are. Because you hear people talk about hot sign a lot, right? And I feel like there's like some context that is lacking like around it, which is it's not just hot sign for the sake of hot sign. If you have a little bit of intel about the area that you're hunting, or even experience in other states in similar type of topography or similar type of terrain or something like that, to where you can put some context around that sign as to whether or not it's hot and still huntable or hot and you've already missed it, right? Because I think a lot of times people set up one hot sign. It's like, oh man, I found all this hot sign and I'm going to hunt it and it's going to be great. Like a new scrape opened up or whatever. But if that's the only time that deer, that buck that made that sign is going to actually be there, then you've already missed your window. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right. So I think when you talk about hunting hot sign, everybody in their head goes to like late October and rubs and scrapes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's just kind of, that's like default mode. And certainly that's like a component of it, right? Like I find a lot of staging areas in October because of rubs. It's just how it works. But I can think of so many examples in my life. So in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we open mid-September. Just every year, 15th, 17th, whatever it is. And if I find a rub, like even in the, 10 days before that, if I'm out scouting or checking a camera or something, if I find a rub, field edge, in the woods, I don't care. That changes my plans. It's almost a guarantee, because I have had such good luck finding fresh rubs in September and hunting like right there, that because they're still on that summertime pattern. So even the best scenario is when I'm out checking a camera or something in September and I see a rub back off of the field in the woods and it's fresh and you're like, they had velvet 5 days ago. So that's important to me. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you can drop into the woods there and that deer he's going to show up because he hasn't been pressured a whole bunch yet. And so I would say, like, to people listening to this, the fresh sign thing is really important the entire season. And it's not just rubs and scrapes. Like, it's not just that community scrape on October 20th. I'll give you an example. Like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I went down to Nebraska, got my ass kicked down there. It was like 100 degrees. I was camping. It was miserable. I had a few close calls. I didn't kill one. I came back to Minnesota the night before the opener, and I had a pretty good buck that I was kind of working on in this valley, and there's a bean field there, and it was like one of those opening day setups before everybody blows them out. And as I was walking across this field's 100 acres on this. This is just a permission-based farm. Half of it is alfalfa, half of it is soybeans. And there's a little waterway in there, and I had a tree stand in there because it's just always, it can be real good for early season. And my plan is to go to this corner where this buck's living on these beans, and it's just a typical early season setup. And as I'm walking across this alfalfa field, there's deer shit everywhere. I mean, I'm just like looking at it, and I'm like, I walked through and I stopped, and I was like, don't walk past that. Like they're clearly using this, and I hate the spot because it's visible from a road. Mm-hmm. I hate it. So you're like, no way is a big one going to come out, right? Because it's just not the spot. But I'm like, I gotta just try it. I had a good wind. It's opening night, somebody's going to screw up maybe, but it was just the sheer amount of deer droppings in that field on my walk in there. And I got up in there, and an hour later heard a stick snap in the woods and had 2 bucks come out, and one of them was a nice 8-pointer with a drop tine over his eye, and I thumped him, and I was like, it was so dumb and simple, but it was just a matter of just finding fresh sign on September 17th or whatever it was, and not ignoring it, because we go in with the idea that you need something really special a lot of times, like, well, think about it this way.
Do you think? Go ahead.
Well, I'll wrap this up quick here, but just think about it this way. if you go to Kansas or you go to Western North Dakota to hunt, or I take your pick, traveling somewhere, and if you were walking a creek bed or you were walking a drainage in Iowa, where I don't care, and you ran across a trail that was just pounded in tracks, you would hunt it. Mm-hmm. Just because you're like, I don't have anything else. I don't need to go yet and try to find that huge collection of rubs or that community scrape. You look at it and go, there's a billion deer going through here right now, it looks like. And I believe, because I'm in one of these good states, that I'm around big deer. So it's worth it to hunt that fresh sign right there. But if we're at home and we find that, we have all those years of information and all that scouting, and, well, I know he likes to live down there, or he always beds on this ridge, you might walk right past that. You might be like, I'm going to make a mental note of it, but it's not going to be the same thing to you. And I think, you and I have talked about this a lot. I think that's one of the things about traveling to hunt that really changes your perspective on stuff, because the things that are valuable to you on the road, you kind of forget about them a lot of times at home. Like just think about the difference if you set up a stand and you did a hang and hunt in whatever state, and you were sitting there and you saw a little buck go through the woods 100 yards away. You'd be like, why? Like, should I go look at that? Even though say it's a forky, but at home, you'd be like, I don't care about that at all. I'm moving on to the next thing. And I think about that stuff a lot, because when you kind of get into that flow state on the road, you find deer quick and oftentimes get on big ones. And then at home, when you have all this information and all this scouting, and, on paper, you should be in the game in a way that you should not be on the road, it's often the reverse. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's as simple as keep it simple, stupid, right? It like, I've had this saying that I've been saying for like basically since November. That is, when they tell you who they are, believe them. Like, don't look at it beyond that, right? Like deer, this is going to sound, some people are probably going to hate this, but they're not smart. They're just very observant, right? They're just very aware of their surroundings. They're not smart. They're not rationalizing. Like they don't have the capability to do that, right? They live in a primal kind of, in a very kind of primal way, where it's like survive, like I need to live. So whatever that takes, right? It's not like, oh, I don't think I'm going to go over here today because I don't really want to take the scenic route. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's like they don't give two shits about the scenic route, right? They're just trying to fill their belly and breed and stay alive. Like those are the things they're trying to accomplish. And so I've been kind of having this mantra of, just like a person, if they're an asshole and they show you themselves to be an asshole, believe them. Don't let them be an asshole to you 5 times. You know what I mean? Before you figure it out. Like, once is probably enough. Same thing with deer. It's like if they show you what they want to do, then, take that as the gospel and kind of go with it. I think what's interesting is, I think context of parcel, I think kind of matters when we're talking about hot sign as well. Right. Because I feel like, and this is just, I would be curious what your kind of thoughts are on this, but I feel like it feels like to me, whenever I'm in like the big wood setting versus like smaller parcel setting, the hot sign becomes less important to me, for this reason, that I'm pretty confident that they travel a lot in that scenario, and that the chances that they're really close to wherever that sign was laid down, I mean, unless it's like I can smell like the piss in the scrape or whatever, right? The chances of them being really, really close, unless it's like there's a slam dunk kind of bedding area that's like close by or something like that, probably not super high, right? And so going off of my long-term data and understanding how deer like to move through the area is probably a better bet for me than the hot sign is in that scenario. Now, the inverse, when I'm on a smaller piece, the hot sign kind of becomes everything, partially because, I don't want to say everything, but it becomes more important because I also have a lot fewer setups, a lot fewer places where I might be able to be, right? And so there's only so many places I'm going to be able to intercept them. If he's showing his hand in a specific spot that at least he's been there recently, well, then it's that's as good a place as any. So I'm curious if you think, like, if that's something that you think about, or how you think about that.
Man, when I'm in a big wood setting, if I find fresh sign, a lot of times what I do, so if I draw a tag in a good state, or I'm hunting somewhere with a high deer density, if I find a lot of deer sign, I oftentimes can set up right there and be in the game then. With the big woods thing, if I find a really interesting scrape or a series of rubs or something, a lot of times what I do is I try to stay back and do an observation sit, because like you said, the trails are different. The movement is different. Like they're nomadic, they're low density. And I find it so often where I'll be sitting there, overlooking a valley or something, and I'm like, they'll just mill through this way and go up the hill that way, and you're like, it looks like there might be a reason to it, and then you sit there the next day or the next morning, and deer come through the opposite way, and they mill through, and it's not like everybody gets on that trail and goes point A to B. And so a lot of times for me, it's a matter of like, that sign is good enough to get me to just post up and try to see what's going on, and then let the deer actually show me. But there's such a higher level of randomness, at least in my experience, to big woods whitetails. There's a browse pattern going on, a lot of masked. It's a hard situation to hunt, and then you factor in the low deer density. So for me, it's like, if I find something, like I get excited about sign, because a lot of times you don't really have.
You don't find very much of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like elk hunting. Like you oftentimes, if you're in an over-the-counter unit, don't have a hell of a lot of elk sign to work with until you have a whole bunch of it in one little spot. And the big woods kind of functions that way, but it's not. It's a less predictable environment to me. So I'm kind of on your page with that, where it's like, it's important, but not the same way it's important in other places.
When I do get really excited about it, if it's in a place that I expected to find it, or if it's in a place where my long-term kind of data of running trail cameras and stuff like that, if it shows up in a place that's like in those general areas, because I hung a trail camera in a spot because I'm like, this spot should be good. Like there should be deer here in whatever time of year that I'm hanging the camera for. And when it shows up there, then I'm like, okay, I got a couple pieces of information now. It's like, I expected it to be here. Maybe a trail camera relatively close by had some deer on it, a month ago or 2 weeks ago or last year even, for a lot of times for me, it's the year prior, because I usually don't pull a lot of my cameras during the course of the year. Then I'm like, cool, it's good enough that I'm going to hunt the area. Might not be on that sign, but I'm going to probably hunt the area. Right. Dude, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, so I always listen to your Foundations podcasts that you do, because I think they're really, really good. And who doesn't want like 15 to 20 minutes of Tony once a week, to be honest. And I was super stoked, not just because you said my name on your show, which I appreciated, but that you started digging in on the long-term kind of like data trail camera kind of strategy, because that's something I've been on for a while. Like it's something I use, and especially whenever it's like big woods, like I use that. This is why I don't prioritize the hot sign in that area as much as maybe others might, is because like I'm looking at stuff from almost like at least a 2 year, if not like a 3 to 4 year kind of run, like in a general area where it's like I might have 10 cameras out, and I'm watching what deer are doing for 3 years through the different seasons, how they're using different areas. They disappear in this part in October, and then they're over here in November, and then in December they come over here. It's like, and so I start to get a sense of like how they're moving around. And it also gives me a little bit of a sense of like in the big woods of what I might not know exactly where the food is, but by how they're moving through the cameras that I have set up, I can tell directionally what direction the food's in, essentially, right? Yep. At the different times of year, what the interests are, and directionally what the interests are. So what are you kind of picking up from like starting to play the long-term game? And two, what are you hoping to kind of unveil, like as you kind of continue down the path?
So this is going to sound really weird, but a couple of the states I hunt a lot, you can't run cameras on public land, or you can't run cameras on certain kinds of public land. So a lot of the land that I hunt in Wisconsin, I can't run trail cameras. So it's like you're just working off a sign and sightings and whatever, scouting. But I own 2 properties over there. One's 28, one's 30 acres. I don't even hardly ever hunt them. Like my daughters hunt them. I like going to the big woods. I like having room to roam. And so, but because my daughters are hunting, I've started paying a lot more attention to them and setting them up better. And I just happened to run a camera on one of my properties like 4 years ago and leave it up. I couldn't get to it before the winter came. And it was like, it was like witnessing a world that had never occurred to me when I checked that camera. I was like, I knew there was some movement there, and I was pretty curious about this little corner and like how they skirt this swamp and whatever, but I had no idea the level of movement there. And so I'm like, okay, I at least have to run this again. So I did it again, and it was the same kind of thing. And I was like, Tony, you got to hunt this. Like, you got to get off of that public and go sit this. You just got to do it. I didn't do it. But last year I ran a camera there again. And same kind of thing. It's like, even during the rut, it's like once every 2 to 3 days, a buck goes through there in daylight. And it might be a spike. It might be 130 incher. There's just not very many deer over there. But taking 3 or 4 years of a camera in that spot, I'm like, don't look past this anymore. Don't forget this. So this mild winter we have, I've been in there. I've scouted every inch of that place. I have a tree. I put a tree stand up last weekend in there. Like, I've got it. I'm not joking, man. I found this pine tree. I was so covered in sap last weekend, but this like double trunk pine tree that's 15 yards off of this trail. So much good cover because I get busted over there. Deer look up a lot. And I don't want to sound too cocky, but I'm real confident.
What we were talking about earlier.
Right. I am real confident that if I get a couple days during the rut to sit all day there, as long as I have the right wind, I'm going to have some encounters with something. And it was what it made me realize is partially because of my hunting, the spots I hunt and the kind of the way I hunt a lot of states, but not for very long. I had sort of ignored this strategy, like because it just wasn't really much of an option for me. And so I had always, you're sending me pictures all the time and we're talking, and I'm always looking at guys like you and I'm like, that's a huge hole in my game. I run cameras, but I'm not like a student of the camera game. I've kind of always been kind of a little bit dismissive of it, and I like them, but it's never been like a huge component of my hunting strategy. And that spot has just kind of like turned me on it. Like, if you have the chance, and so to take it a step further, that property's 30 acres, and I have a little 28 acre property down the road that I didn't even set foot in for 2 years because my girls were hunting the other one, and this one's just got more swamp and it's just more of a pain in the ass. But I was like, what am I missing in there? Like, what would Clint do here? And it wouldn't be don't run any cameras. So last fall I put up cameras on the main trail, and then I found a few of these trails. After I killed my buck, I just walked it out, and I found a couple of these like trails through this tamarack swamp that I'm like, this is pretty cool. And so I left up 4 cameras on that property till, I don't know, March. I picked them up sometime. And dude, it was like, if you would have asked me beforehand, how many deer do I think made it through on there and were using that on a consistent basis, I would have said 3 or 4, maybe 2 bucks, 2 does, maybe half a dozen deer. I didn't count them up, but I probably had 8 bucks on there that made it through the gun season into the winter. And we had such a mild winter, I have to assume most of them probably made it through. Right. Including one deer that's like 160 inches, who is like, you get one picture of him, and if he's looking at that camera, I won't get a picture of him again. I'll get him a different spot. But it's like, it's never like he's just walking by. You get a picture of him, and there's a couple of old does in there where they're staring at that camera, and you get a picture of them running away. In February. Yeah. But so, yeah, I kind of adopted your strategy. And now, in fact, so last weekend I hung that stand in that spot, cleaned out a little access trail. I got the whole thing like, it's nice. I'm so excited. I'm never hanging stands in April, Right. But it just was it was the right window. And then I cut this access trail on the other property, that 28 acre property, because I was like, I just feel like I'm getting busted a lot going in the way that I was going in. Right. So I'm going to just go through the brush here in the swamp, and I'm going to make a different access where I'm going to be like in the thick of it. It's like carving out a little tunnel through those tamaracks, but just to give myself some other options to take my girls in there. And I'm literally, it has changed how I look at just hunting those 2 properties. And now it's like, I'm getting ideas for like, if I draw Iowa this year, like, how am I going to do this? Because I just, and you know this, you've talked about this a ton, but the education you get from 5 months, 6 months of a camera that you're not messing with, you're not going in there, and the patterns you actually start to recognize. And it like what it does is we think, we're going to pattern deer and we're going to get a picture of a buck doing the same thing every day. We go in there and we kill him, right? Like cell cameras promise that all the time, right? Like he starts daylighting, you go in there and you shoot him. When you run a camera like you do, or like I did this year, you're like, okay, he's here once every 3 weeks or once a month he walks this. But this trail had 3 good bucks on it this week of October or this week of November. So you go, if you're not one buck hunting, not hit listing it, man, you can get some value out of that in a way that's just I don't know if you'd get it any other way.
Yeah. I mean, for me, especially with the big woods piece that I started, whatever it was, I think last year was the 3rd year that I've kind of been on it. And then last year was the first year I'd seen bucks on it before. I had some encounters, but last year was like the first year where it really started making some sense to me, and you and I talked about it before the season where I was like, I got some intel, I don't know. And you're like, oh, you're going to be in the game, and I was like, I don't know, man. And sure enough, I hunted it twice and, saw a good buck, saw a couple does, had a buck grunting behind me. So this is kind of the funny part of that. So what I didn't notice in scouting it, walking it, and looking at the map was kind of how like a bunch of this stuff that I was interested in all kind of connected. And it wasn't until I saw the trail cameras that I had set up over the course of the 3 years, and I looked at how the deer were moving, and I was catching a couple of them at like multiple cameras, like in a day or in a night or whatever. And these cameras are, might be, I think the furthest apart might be like a mile apart or something like that. Some of these cameras are. And what I then realized was it became real obvious when I saw that what terrain features they were using to move. I was like, this is how they're moving. This is like how they're following the terrain, because there's no other way they would get from camera A to camera B, like any other way, really, right? And so it was that piece of the puzzle that I kind of not solved, but I kind of understood, right? And then, of course, like time and things like that. And then to kind of make it all come full circle, so there's this deer that, that I'm interested in, and he's really only killable, a handful of weeks a year during the course of the year. Have him on trail camera at least 2 different years, right? So last year and another year, and have a sense from where he's coming from, where he's bedded, and have a sense of where he's kind of going, and why he's going in that direction. So the kicker is so last year when I was hunting, I had a buck running behind me, right? And because I hunt in the high pressure state of Pennsylvania, I immediately thought that it was a person. Now, where I was set up and how far I walked to get into that place, chances of it being a person were very, very little. And I just walked in like right after a torrential downpour, and it was like 2:00. You know what I mean? And so it was like, but my brain going like pressure. I was like, I can't. I literally was sitting in my tree, and I go to myself, I can't believe I walked all this way, and I drove 2.5 hours, whatever it was. And there's a freaking guy like 100 yards from me. You know what I mean? Like blowing on his grunt tube, on the second weekend of October, like I'm like, what an asshole. Yep. And then, I hear this buck grunt, and then I hear like a doe snort and take off. And I'm like, that's weird, because I'd been in the tree for 15 minutes at that point. So she didn't hear me get in, and she certainly didn't smell me because my wind wasn't going that way. And then fast forward, like the hunt, like a couple of does come out, and I watched them, and I ended up, as I was walking out, I had an encounter with like a decent buck that I tried to stalk and screwed that up. But so I go back to scout it with my buddy, and went up and met up with him. We went and did like a scout for the day. Cause we both know of this deer, and we're both kind of like, we both agreed, like, dude, if he kills it, like I'm taking you out to a steak dinner. We're going out, we're spending a weekend, whatever you want to drink, like it's on me, right? And then opposite, if I do, then it's like we're going out, he's taking me out, we're going to go for a weekend somewhere and like just do it up, right? And we're scouting, and like we walked back behind where I was at, and we got back to this area, and I was like, man, this is where I kind of thought I heard that buck grunting, right? And sure enough, there's a big rub right there, right? Like right on this like little knob, and there's like one ominous trail camera image that I have of a deer that I can't see fully. I can only see like part of his rack, but there's only one deer with that frame that it could potentially be that that G2 and that G3. And it was the day prior to me being in there. And so I'm like, you know what I mean? And so like all the puzzle pieces start coming together. And I say all that because it was really running those trail cameras for multiple years and doing some hunting on it and some observations and stuff like that and seeing some deer. But it was that kind of told me how they were moving, like how they were using the terrain. So it was like the map study with the long-term understanding of how they wanted to move and, you know, telling me what times of year they want to use different areas kind of helped put me in that spot that time of year that I was in. And now I kind of have a sense of like what this guy might be doing. Right. And so it was just, I kind of got like the hair kind of stood up on my arms when I saw that rub. Right. And then I remembered that trail camera picture. It was like, if it was in a movie, it was like, like all these flashes went off and I was like, wait a minute, you know, now was it him? Who knows? You know, my buddy and I were talking about it and, I was like, I just remember like it was a really, really low, like guttural, like grunt. I was like to the point to where it's like in PA, like we don't have a ton of mature deer. Right. And so I don't hear that type of grunt very often. Like I've heard that in Iowa. I've heard that in Kansas. You know what I mean? I've heard that in Missouri, but not in PA. And so that's why I thought it was a person. Cause I thought they had the extinguisher set on like big buck, you know what I mean? Like letting it rip, you know? And then, so that's when I started thinking, I was like, I might be closer than I think, you know, type of thing. Cause I was like, it might've been, I was like, cause that was a mature deer and it sounded like a mature deer grunt and it was the rubs in the right spot. But that's an instance there where it's like, if I see that hot sign come this year at some point, all those things will go together to go, yeah, you don't walk by this, even though it's in a big wood setting, right? Cause I've got context.
You know what else is interesting about that?
What's that?
So it doesn't happen very often, but you do, you know, like we always talk about the second rut sometime in December, right? You know, 28 days after the main rut and the fawns will cycle through or whatever. And it's like, you know, for me, I've seen evidence of it a few times. Like I've hunted a few times where I'm like, they're definitely chasing here in December, you know, but most of the time you don't see it. But we never talk about how 28 days before the main rut, there are a certain amount of does that are going to cycle. And dude, you hear once in a while, you hear stories about that where that'll happen to you where a big bastard will be chasing one like October 10th. And you never, you know, like it's not something you could play on. You wouldn't be like, I'm hunting the first rut or whatever, you know, like you wouldn't, but it is like a component of it. And we never talk about it. Like I remember when I was working at Peterson's bow hunting, one of the guys I work with, it was like October 10th or 11th, and he killed a great big one down in Buffalo County. And he said it was grunting and chasing this doe like it was November 7th. And I just remember thinking, like, that's crazy. But then you start looking at conception date studies, and you see, like, that's like it's a possibility. You can't count on that, but it's like a little added wild card to the situation that's just freaking cool to be around.
Yeah, man. I mean, my God, if I could have an early doe in that area, like I don't know. I would do something. I would give to charity. Like, you know, it's like I would go work at like a soup kitchen or something for Christmas. Like, I don't know, you know, cause that's one of the spots like that's local to me where I killed my deer this year. That's what happens there. It's like, and I have, again, long-term data. I have the trail camera data of an early fawn drop, like way early, where whenever I got the picture of that fawn, you know, I had a hypothesis that's what the case was in this particular spot. And I finally got a fawn drop on camera early enough where she was all like wobbly legged and stuff like that. I mean, fawn was like no more than like 3 days old, tiny. And I was able to just kind of do the math, right? Like minus 200 from there, right? And get a time frame as to when she would have had to have been bred. And it's the week that I like in that spot. Like she would have had to have been bred that week in order to have that fawn. Yeah. And so there's a bedding area that's right there. So those does like to bed there. And so that's why that spot's always good, like in very early October, because all those does hold the same estrus state. And so there's like a little party that kicks off like super early in October in that spot, you know? And so early October, that's where you find me parked, because it's like just been consistent for 4 years in a row. It happens, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much biological variance that we don't, like we really are good at lumping deer into like specific categories and being like, all mature bucks do this.
Yeah.
all those cycle this, and it's like, that's just not how nature works, man.
Yeah, because like the opposite that I've seen, like in Kansas, is like, you'll get some of the big ones that'll get up there in that kind of like quote unquote first rut, like around 6th, 7th through the 8th type of time frame until they find their doe, cut them out, and then go into lockdown, and then they don't come back out till like the 17th or whatever. That's when you start to see them again, and then that's like when the party really starts. That's like when you really see like the big bastards get up, right? Because like the first early does, quote unquote early does, the earlier part of November, those have been bred, and now they're on the hunt for like the next group, so out there, it's like I see more of that, right? Like of more of like the big bastards don't get up till a little bit later, right? Like when I go out there, I actually time it a little bit earlier than most people do, right? And it's just because I had intel on a spot that was good to me, and I kind of knew whenever things kick off. But by and large, like you talk to Jared Scheffler and those guys or whatever, it's like they want to be out there like right before Thanksgiving timeframe or even after if they need to be, right? Because that's like whenever where the big guys are going to make more mistakes and make themselves more visible.
Yep. And I'm starting to get there too, man. Like later in November, I've always been a pretty big fan of October just because, and I'm starting to think part of it, there are a lot of reasons why the deer hunting could be good or bad the first week of November, right? Or could be, the rut could be banging or not. But I'm starting to think like there's such an emphasis on hunters being out there, say October 27th to November 10th. Like anybody who's going to deer hunt, from the most hardcore to the biggest weekend warrior, 2 days a year type of hunter, they're going then. And I really think that that's like having an effect on like how good the rut can be to hunt in a lot of places. Like, if you're on Bill Winke's farm in Iowa, it doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, but if you're in a place where a shitload of people are going to pour into the woods then and really get after it, and those people are drawing attention to themselves all the time with calls and scents and whatever else they can use, I really think part of the reason that later, like mid-November on time frame gets really good for big ones is because that factor tends to diminish in a lot of states. And I know it's not like the sole reason, but I think it's a component of it.
Oh, I'll be honest with you. It plays into it now going forward, plays into my strategy for when I'm going to take trips. Yep. At least it used to never really cross my mind before, but I've been kind of bebopping around different states long enough now to where it's like I'm seeing what you're saying, like it's visible, and I'm now starting to kind of think about, all right, what other times of the year can I go where I can get away from people, right? The only thing you have to take into account is like, when do gun seasons come in and things of that nature, right? Like this year I'm going to Missouri, and like I definitely want to be there before gun season because it becomes crazy town, like, during that time frame. So I'm wanting to miss that. But like things for going to plain states and stuff like that, I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine about this the other day because he's going to go to a plain states this year, and he's never hunted the plains. And we were kind of talking about it, and and I told him like the time frame that I like to be there and stuff. I was like, if you have the time, I was like, Tony says October's great. I was like, and I keep saying I'm going to follow his advice at some point. I was like, if you have the time to spend behind the glass and find one, I was like, you can, I'm sure you can get it done. I was like, I just haven't made the jump yet. I was like, but that's how you start to get rid of the pressure, right? You start to go during those times of year where it's, you might have to do a little bit more sitting behind the glass and a little less hunting, Yeah.
It's all a risk reward, right? Like one of the reasons I like October so much is when I hunt around pressure, a lot of people don't like hunting in middle of October. That's that's the whole thing. And so when I travel to public land, if you're like November 5th or October 12th, I'm like, a lot of times I'm like, I'd rather be in there in October because the benefit I feel that I get from fewer people in the woods outweighs what the rut will give me when there's a lot of people in the woods. And, it's still like there's like a spirit of the hunt thing, right? Like it's just fun to be there during the rut. But I also feel like I don't like randomness. Like I don't like crossing my fingers. Like the rut is weird for me. I love it, but I'm like, I don't ever want to really rely on it unless I just draw an Iowa tag or something and I just know it's going to be like awesome. But
Right.
when you look at like, mid-October, it just sort of plays into my style really well. I like hunting in the woods. I like finding fresh sign or that mass thing or something that's going on right now. And I like knowing there's a pretty good chance I'm going to pull up to park and there won't be other trucks there. Because then you're like, now I can just, even though the deer will be theoretically harder to work than they will be during the rut, I can still work them without a ton of outside influence from other hunters. And it takes a, it's sort of like needle in a haystack type of hunting, like, but you have to just have confidence you're going to find the needle. Because when you do, like last year when I went to Oklahoma with Steve, I looked at a lot of ground. I mean, I walked so much, and I barely found anything I even liked. But I found one little area that was just on, and it was, that was like, I think I got down there October 12th or something. And in 4 days, we shot 4 bucks on public land. He lost one, and, a couple were little. His was nice. But it was just like, out of all that work, there was only really one place I found that I liked. But it was so good, it didn't matter. And that's, like, we don't really talk about that as far as, like, the October thing a lot, because so much of the hunting information comes from people who have good places to hunt in November. Like, you wouldn't go do that if you had a private place that was full of deer, because you wouldn't have to. But a lot, like, again, like a lot of people who are listening to this, man, you can sit it out and try to play it safe and leave things alone till the rut, and it might work. But maybe a better bet is to try to find some secondary places to keep hunting during October to keep yourself in the game, because you will find, if you stay out there and you scout enough, like those bucks out there, they're super killable in that time frame if you know what to do. And part of the benefit is just because you'll be one of the few people out there doing it.
Yeah, man, that can't be overstated enough, right? Like, just, I mean, that's why, people ask me locally, like, when do I like to hunt? I'm like, October on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Yep. Like, it's like, I'm that specific that it's like, I want to do it in October and I want to do it in the middle of the week, because people are at work. I have the woods to myself. If I have an idea of what's happening on a piece of property, or a piece of public land, I know how deer want to move or whatever the case is, then, I feel like, to your point, I feel like I'm in the game. I feel like as long as I got in clean, my access was good, things like that, that I should see something. If it's a buck I want to shoot or not, remains to be seen. But I feel like I at least know what the deer want to do, and I can put myself in position to see the deer,
Well, dude, I totally agree. And you know what I think about it, that this might sound crazy, but if you take a weekend in PA, Michigan, whatever, name your state where there's lots of pressure, there is an effect there on the deer that I think we really don't understand. And one of the ways that I like to frame this up, because I think about this a lot, when I moved to the cities, and I fish like crazy, 'cause we have lakes all over. And so I moved from smallmouth and trout streams to a place with a ton of, like, largemouth lakes, essentially. And, I was a weekend warrior when I moved up here because of my job. And all I did was bounce around in the waves from wake boats and, jet skis and whatever. It was miserable. And I didn't catch a lot of fish. Like, it was way tougher than I thought. But what I figured out was, let's say you have July 4th. The lake is going to be, name your lake, it's covered in
pounded,
people, right? If you go out on the morning of July 5th and you start flipping docks and fishing, you will have I call it the hangover bite, because you will have a great day on the water. And I was like, well, it's probably because they just holed up because there was so much activity that they just weren't really doing their thing. But I think that, like, sells it short. I think they're probably not eating as much as they would. They're not, like, we don't think about this in terms of fish or deer, but I'm positive that those bucks out there like walking around and smelling stuff and making rubs and just doing their thing more than laying down all day long during daylight. Like, I'm positive they like that life better. So if you think about a weekend and, let's say 100 people are in that national forest with you, and then on a Monday, 9 people are out there. Like those, not only are they aware that their level of danger has plummeted, but also they have this residual feeling of playing it real safe for a couple of days because they were in a heightened sense of danger, probably didn't eat and do their thing as well as they do when they're more relaxed. So they're more likely to move and just do their thing. Like I think there's a lot going on there that we just, I'm filling in the blanks. It might be total BS. I don't know, but I think that
no, I agree with you. I agree with you because I mean I think you see the same thing after like a nasty like rainstorm, right? It's like why we always talk about like, hey, you want to be in your tree or wherever you're going to hunt like as the rain's stopping. Like you want to be in it for like 15, 20 minutes before the rain stops, maybe a half hour, depending on how much of a downpour it is and how wet you're willing to get. Because as soon as it turns off, especially if it's been like a day long soak, like a 24-hour soaker or longer, where those deer have had to hole up a little bit and diminish what they usually do. And not saying that they don't move in the rain and stuff like that. Like they'll move in rain, but like they don't want to be out in a pouring monsoon any more than we do. Yep. You know what I mean? It's the same reason why when you get a heavy snow, they're looking for hemlocks to get under, right? Because they're trying to get out of the weather. Now, if it's just flurrying, no, they don't care, right? Yeah. But I'm talking about weather that drives them to need to like find some shelter, right? Or to like miserable weather, right? Yep. It's like as soon as that shit stops, it's not a surprise if they're up on their feet moving, doing their thing, right? Because they had to stop doing their normal activity for 24 hours, 48 hours, and have limited resources, you know what I mean, doing that, So I think it's the same thing. It's like all of a sudden, because like I see that as pressure too. That's just environmental pressure. Right. You know what I mean? It's like when we think about pressure, we always think about people, but it's like there are other things that put pressure on deer. You know what I mean? Sure. Like if you think about pressure, not just like forcibly moving them because like a presence is there. It's like, no, there's environmental pressure. Like as far as like, rain coming in and making them hole up, or like the food sources shifting, like those are all pressures. We just don't think about them the same way.
Dude, there are a couple of dog trainers down, and one of them's down in Oklahoma, Rick and Ronnie Smith. They're really well known in the pointer world. They come from like dog training royalty, and I've interviewed them a bunch of times. And one of the things they talk about a lot is how honest certain dog breeds are. Like, and they speak about it in a way where we don't really think of dogs being honest or dishonest, but it's like they show you what they want to do and how you're going to have to work with them to get something out of them, right? Like they're not going to mold to you. Like you as a trainer, like you have to understand how to mold yourself to the dog as well. And I think when you talk about, it's pouring rain and it's gonna move out at 2:00. I gotta be there. I gotta be there then. What you do when you don't just hunt the rut, or you don't just rely on like I'm always going to rattle or I'm always going to do something, and you hunt those times that it's not as good, October, September, whatever, December, those deer give you an honest look at what they do. It's not the chaos of the rut. It's not the rifle opener where there's this kind of insurmountable element that's going to change the dynamics of the woods. When you're out there on October 5th and some weather event happens, those deer, how they react to it is they're honest. Like, this is what we do as deer in this situation. And I think if you don't get out there and hunt a lot and experience those or scout during those conditions, especially if you can long range glass throughout the summer, you see a lot of that kind of stuff happen then too. You just don't get as clear of a picture of what they're going to do. And I'll give you an example. So just the other night, we did a little family bike ride. We got this little hobby farm down the road they have a bunch of baby sheep. They're adorable. And the girls like to go look at them. And it was just so nice. So we went and looked at these little baby sheep. And then we just went for a bike ride. And we had this weird situation where it was sunny all day. And then we had this just super thick, dark cloud move in and cover up the sun. So it was evening already. So it was like hour and 15, 20 minutes before it would have actually been dark. But it got like this weird gray kind of false twilight light. And we started seeing animals all over. Deer crossing up and moving. And, my wife commented on the light. Like, everybody noticed it. That's one of those situations where you're like, there's this thing happening that if you have never been in the woods and gone through that, you might not know. But that's like, if you were out there, like if you take somebody who's a really good hunter and they got a lot of experience, if that happened, they'd pick up their bow. Because it's like, you feel it, and And Mark and I just did a podcast on this, and we've been talking about this a lot, kind of like being a generalist in the outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you're talking about developing instincts for anything, deer, fish, whatever, you level up by time out there paying attention to that stuff. Like my buddy and I, we fished a tournament a couple of years ago that it's a frog only tournament, so you can only throw fake frogs, spro frog tournament. And we were getting our asses handed to us. And we had found fish. But it was one of those mornings where it was dead still. And there was just like nothing happening. You know what I mean? Like you're like, it feels like something should be happening, but you just, like the world is just dead. And like 10 o'clock, 10:30 in the morning, we started noticing some dragonflies going over the water. And pretty soon we're like, man, there's a lot of dragonflies out that we didn't notice before. And then that frog bite just turned on. And those fish were there, laying under those mats of grass, and they weren't looking up, they weren't feeding until those dragonflies, like something changed,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that bite went nuts. And you're like, they didn't just come in here.
Right.
Like that situation you're talking about, those deer sitting in there in the rain, they didn't move away to someplace dry and then come back. They were there. They just get sick of laying in the rain and they stand up and move the minute it lightens up. Like it's not when it goes away. It's like when it shifts from downpour to like that tail end drizzle and the light
tolerable. Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of times the light changes by like 10 degrees and it gets a little bit lighter and all of a sudden you're like, we got to get ready. And that stuff, I mean, that's a hard thing to like sell to people because the only way to get there is just to go out in the woods a lot.
Dude, I mean, I love that idea of like when they speak their truth, right? Because like that's like the thing that I've been screaming like lately is when they reveal themselves to you, believe them. When they show you who they are, believe them, right? And that to me, I think will be my mantra going forward, right? Because I think a lot of times, I'm guilty of it too, of wanting things to be a certain way or overthinking things or whatever the case is. But now more and more, it's like I kind of repeat that to myself because I've seen it happen too many times, like where it's come true when they've done something once or I've seen something once and then I ignore it and then I end up seeing it again and I'm like, damn it. Like if I just would have, if I would have just paid attention, you know what I mean? And there's a couple of places like that this year that I'm looking forward to hunting for just does because I'm gonna take the longbow and let the longbow eat early in the season, and we'll see if it stays with me whenever it's time to when it's time to try to track down the one that has me interested.
We'll see if that's just an October weapon or if it's a season long weapon.
Yeah. Because our season here opens same like you. It's like middle of September. But I'll actually be in Idaho then chasing elk, and that will definitely be a compound because I'm not going to trust myself with that type of hunt, like with a stick bow. But it will get broken out for some doe hunts locally, and then we'll see how I feel with it and whether or not it stays in the truck with me. I'm going to be one of those assholes that takes both on every hunt and then decides at the last minute whenever I get in the back seat of my truck to pull out the bow that I'm going to take, that it's like the compound always goes with me.
Dude, I used to be kind of a prick about that kind of stuff. Like if you're going to bow hunt turkeys. Don't bring the shotgun with you or whatever.
Right.
Now I'm just like, I don't care. Whatever.
Yeah.
If you want to carry that stick bow out there, great. If you decide to switch because it's easier to kill stuff with a compound, who cares?
Yeah. I'm feeling pretty good with it though. Like I've been able to stretch my distance out to like 30 yards and shoot. And that's the furthest at this point. But I feel confident out to 20 yards now, to where it's like, I'm shooting at a deer target. I'm on foam in the kill zone, mostly every time. I don't get very many flyers anymore where I'm like, what the hell happened there? Yep. Whole different game when you got a live animal in front of you though,
right. Do you, when you shoot traditional and you at this point now, when you do get a flyer, is it kind of like a compound where like,
I know as soon as I let it go,
you weren't paying attention. Like, it's when I shot trad bows a lot, I was always like that, where you knew all it was a concentration thing. Like you pulled her back and you let her rip, but you weren't in the moment. And when I'm in the moment, man, it's like it lands where I want it to land. It's like for people who haven't shot one before consistently or whatever, I learned just by my dad
didn't really shoot a compound growing up. Like when he did shoot archery, he shot a recurve. And so that's who taught me, initially how to shoot, years ago. And it was always just like, shoot it like you throw a baseball. Like I was always a pretty good baseball player. So it's like, just look where you want the arrow to go, pull it back and put the arrow where you're looking, not to make it seem super simple, but whenever I burn a hole through where I want the arrow to go, it goes there. You know what I mean? When I have a weird, like lazy, like left drift with my eye. Like my eye wants to always drift like left and low for some reason, and whenever I recognize it and I make it snap in, it's like, I'm good. And I have a natural like left kind of fade too. And it's usually because I'm either collapsing my draw arm, like collapsing my shoulder in instead of like pulling it back, or I'm not. And it's different, right? Because with a compound, like your hand's loose, like you want it to be loose and like you want to let the bow drop in your hand, right? Forward whenever you let it go. I found, at least for me with a longbow, like I want some tension in my wrist, like after I shoot. And I kind of picked that up a little bit from Jared Scheffler, because I don't know how much you talk to him or about traditional archery or whatever, but that dude is shooting some crazy shit, man. Like I've spent some time with him at the last Harrisburg show, just watching him shoot and talking. And he's shooting like warrior style, freaking like not aiming anything, like almost from the hip with his thumb where he's like exploding like a baseball player. Mm-hmm. His arrows are like, he'll shoot an arrow that's 860 grains and one that's 1200 grains and they'll land at the same spot. Like he doesn't tune them. Like it's crazy. And a lot of it for him, like when he talks about it, is like his tune is actually in like his grip and how he grips. He can make any grain arrow do the same thing based on how he grips the bow, and it's crazy. Like he's just gone so far down the rabbit hole with archery and like reading like old text of like shit that like was captured hundreds of years ago around like archery and like, form and function and stuff like that. And so I was talking to him a bit about it. And so I picked up a little bit of that type of stuff of like trying to use like my body structure and muscles, like, where I set them and stuff like that to help me like not just anchor on my face, but anchor in my body at the same time, and I notice when I do that, like I'm pretty dead on, but that takes a lot of time. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I got a peep here and I'm set up. It's like, it's a lot more like you have to feel your body do stuff, Yeah.
I mean, it's a matter of thousands and thousands of repetitions.
Yeah. I mean, I shoot every day, but
you literally kind of have to think about it, but also learn to like
not think about
it at all. But still,
yeah.
I don't even know how to describe it. Like you have to almost not think about it, but there's got to be something going on in your head somewhere that just gets through it. But you can't like focus on it,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's almost like you still have to have somewhat of a shot sequence. You know what I mean? To a degree, at least I do.
Yep.
I know just in talking to Jared, like there isn't I think that he does like a little bit, but his happens so fast. The way he shoots, like it's not like, see target, aim, pull back, release. Cause his happens like, it's literally like a baseball player throwing a ball. It's just like bang and it's gone. I watched him for like an hour and I was like, that's an artist. Like, I was like, that's not mastery of a weapon like that. I was like, that's a dude who's making art, like with a bow. I was like, I've never seen anybody shoot like that before. But
I'm obviously I'm not as good as him, but like that's my shot sequence with trad bows is I get to full draw and it's gone. Like, yeah. And it really, that's part of the reason I struggled with a compound. I had a lot of reasons why I struggled, but when I started actually hunting deer and could not hit them, part of it was because I was so conditioned to get it off. Like just as soon as I hit, if I shoot a recurve or a longbow and I come to full draw and I have to think about it or move or adjust, unless it's a moving target, that's a different thing for me. But if I'm shooting at like a 3D deer target and I get into like a second or two where now my brain's involved in it, it's over. And
oh yeah.
When I went to compounds, it was like, that's not going to work. Like,
Yeah.
and even, people who film me and who've hunted with me, they're like, you still shoot really fast. I just try to, like, it just works for me. But
Yeah.
the transition was not a smooth one because they are different. And you think, like, the difference between a second and 3-4 seconds,
It's an eternity.
Somebody who takes a long time might get 6 or 7 seconds out of the whole thing. And, like on a target, right? It's different if a deer walks in, but you don't really acknowledge that there's that big of a difference in a couple of seconds and how you go through your shot process. But it's a big deal. And when you shoot trad bows, it really sort of shines a spotlight on that stuff.
Yeah. I will say, like, I picked up my compound just because I'm trying to still shoot that some because I'm going to be using it, at least in Idaho. And it felt weird at first when I picked it back up. I was like, ooh, it's a little weird. It was like, just felt a little awkward. But I will say the one thing that helped me with was, like, man, my pin hover was tighter than it's ever been, and, like, in my groups were as tight as they used to be whenever I used to shoot a lot. Like, it was just like, and I think more so than anything, it was more just like I was focusing. Like, I had the same level of focus that I had from shooting a trad bow because I really need to dial in if I want to be accurate.
Yep.
Where sometimes when I would shoot my compound previously, before starting to pick up a longbow, it's like I would be a little bit lazy with it, because I can be lazy and be good enough. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And now it's like lazy with a trad bow, like, is not only is it not good enough, it's not even close, And so now it's like when I pick up my compound, I feel like I'm laser focused, and it's like I'm just like dropping dimes because I'm just like locked into where it's supposed to go. And the hover is just because I'm used to holding all that weight, like 45 pounds back. Like, if I am holding it for a second, like, I'm used to holding all that as opposed to just a percentage of it. But
right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think I don't do this as much anymore, but for a while I used to do this a lot where if I used to shoot a lot with compounds, and if I was if I wasn't enjoying it, or I was just having one of those days where I'm like, I'm not feeling it, like, for whatever reason, I'd go pick up a recurve and shoot it for a few days, and then I'd go back to that compound, and it was like a relief because it just is fundamentally easier. So it was almost like a
little psychological warfare on yourself,
right? I mean, and the thing about it is that it's so I'm not one of those people who just loves to shoot a bow. Like, I think part of it is because when I was at Bow Hunter, I had to set up so many, and
we talked about that before. Yeah.
Like, I'm not dying to go shoot a bunch of foam. I never regret it. Like, I shot today. Like, I like it, but I don't love it like a lot of people. But when you get in the groove with a trad bow, you're sitting there and you're like, I want to go shoot. It's just a different thing. Like, you
totally
enjoy it in a different way. And I think part of it is, like, with a compound, especially at deer distances, you could maybe walk outside and shoot 20, 30, 40 yards and not miss the vitals for months. I mean, depending on how many arrows you're flinging, whatever. But when you pick up that trad bow, like, any session, you're going to have that
rodeo.
one where you just bury it into the guts or something, or you're just like, oh, shit, like, what happened? And I think that's like there's a motivation there that's missing with a lot of us with compounds. And it's a beneficial thing to know that you'll reduce your chances of that happening, but that's a part of trad bow shooting. Like, that's a part of instinctive shooting, and it's like it sounds like a negative probably to people, but I think it's actually like a positive to know that the failure's coming. Like, at some point.
It's like going back to what we were talking about earlier, dude. It removes the ego. Every time I walk out there, it's like, and I have the longbow in my hand, I know walking into it that I'm not this thing is winning. Like, it's like I need to be one with it versus it being one with me. You know what I mean? Because it's not going to be forgiving, and to me, that's the kind of the appeal of it. Is it just it being connected to me? Like, and it, removing one layer between me and whatever I'm firing an arrow at. Like, that for me is like the game is that. But, well, cool, man. I've kept you here almost an hour and a half. I want to be sensitive to your time. I know you got crazy stuff going on, dude. You're traveling all over. You're chasing birds. You got the girls doing stuff. So I want to make sure you get get on with all that stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, buddy.
Yeah, buddy. I got to go pack my truck up right now. I might try to sneak in a little run here quick before it gets dark. But yeah, we're kicking it off, and it's going to get wild here. I'm hoping to watch several turkeys in the next couple of weeks hit the dirt from those little girls. So
nice. Yeah,
we'll
I look
see.
forward to some social posts with the girls with some turkeys down. I'm gonna head to the jiu-jitsu gym, get ready for my competition. But before that, let people who don't know who the great Tony Peterson is, where all they can find your stuff.
They're great.
Yeah, you like that?
The mediocre. Everything's at Meat Eater right now. We are in the freaking thick of it. There's, I just had a turkey video drop with Sam Soholt, or it should be out probably by the time this hits. At themeateater.com, all my articles are there. The Foundation's podcast is under the Wire to Hunt feed. The only thing that I have that isn't at Meat Eater is I have a whitetail book, Bow Hunting Public Land Whitetails. You can find it at Amazon. That's doing pretty well right now. It's
awesome.
Sort of a very honest look at the hunting industry and
right.
what I think about it and what you need to do to maybe kill a deer or two on public land.
Right.
But yeah, man, this is fun. It's always a blast talking to you, buddy.
Yeah, man. That's as usual. Had a list of things to talk about. We talked about none of them. Awesome.
We did talk a lot about Radiohead, though.
We did. People got an education on Radiohead, so at least they have that. Hopefully that'll help them with their deer hunting.
Maybe.
If not, you can go ahead and send your hate mail to Meat Eater.
Care of
I'll
Mark
see you, buddy.
Kenyon.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, see you, buddy.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.